Hi, this is Megha Joshi, the host of the Boardroom Zen podcast. This show is created for the ambitious business leaders. Are you someone wanting to play big? Want to possess a strong brand and executive presence that makes you belong in every room you walk into? And all of this without putting your personal life on hold? If the answer to those questions is yes, then you are in the right place. In this show, I sit down with best-in-class leaders to distill their wisdom while sharing what helped me stand out as a Fortune 100 executive. So let's get started. Our guest today is an accomplished corporate attorney with deep expertise in emerging markets and healthcare. Currently, he serves as the lead counsel for Huron Consulting's investment banking practice, a role which enables him to leverage his cross-functional expertise in law and finance. Having spent extensive time both working and studying in Europe and Latin America, he routinely employs a global approach to help senior leaders negotiate deals and solve some of the greatest challenges. Outside of work, our guest is passionate about mentoring, sailing, and hiking with his rescue pup, Campbell. Please join me in welcoming Ryan Edmiston to the show. Ryan, welcome.
Hi, Megha. Thank you so much for having me. I was going to say, this is, about 6 months in the making that we first started discussing this. So I'm so happy we're finally able to find time to get together.
Absolutely, Ryan. It's so great to have you here. And it's been wonderful having known you for some time now. And I have to say that we both have something very special in common. And that is we're both Buckeyes. And it is such a privilege for me to bring a fellow Buckeye executive and lead counsel to this show. So thank you again for coming.
Well, I feel like we'd almost be remiss if we didn't start off with an OH.
I know.
There we go. And as you pointed out, too, I'm an attorney, so I feel like the other point that I'd be remiss in not bringing up is to throw out a quick disclaimer there that all of the thoughts and opinions expressed today are my own and not representative of my company or any other entity. So all Ryan content.
I love it. This is authentic Ryan going live.
Roll it uncut. Absolutely.
So Ryan, why don't we start with you sharing a little bit about yourself with the listeners?
Of course. So as you pointed out, one of my proudest attributes is I'm actually a double Ohio State alumnus. I did my undergrad and law school, both at Ohio State, with a short stint in between working in Washington, D.C., doing some policy lobbying work, and then also picking up a master's degree at the University of Edinburgh. So very proud of Scott as well there. But yeah, so that's a little bit of the academic background: finance, international business, environmental science and policy, and then law. So a nice kind of melting pot of interdisciplinary academic training. So I think that also really plays in with my career, that I think it helps me to take a broad, big picture approach to my work. So, right now, as you pointed out, I'm working at Huron Consulting, which is a tremendous group that we have about a 5,000 person overall headcount of consultants, international and spread out all over the world. But my role is particularly working for our investment banking practice group, so the broker-dealer that we maintain. So it's a little bit smaller group, but it gives me an opportunity to, as you point out, really apply the financial and legal training to work on some incredibly interesting deals and some wonderful clients.
Beautiful. And Ryan, with where you are in your corporate trajectory and your overall life experiences, are there any highlights that you'd like to share?
Oh, that's such a good question. I kind of mentioned just a moment ago about traveling a little bit, doing the masters in Scotland, but also through my prior firm that I worked at, we really specialized in emerging markets. So I was able to travel quite a bit in Latin America and really work on some interesting deals there as well. So I think that experience early in my career, being the general counsel, just a few years out of law school at a firm, was tremendously character building in many ways. That I jumped in, the partners took a big chance on me, being essentially a year and a half in as an associate, and to tap me to come in, lead legal for their firm. So it was a gamble that I'd like to think paid off. I know it certainly paid off for me in terms of gaining experience. And I think that's, again, just kind of how I've always learned best is if someone has the training wheels and hand holding me a lot, you just don't have the pressure to succeed. I kind of like that approach of throw me into the deep end of the pool and sink or swim.
Yes, I love it. And I have to say, the partners clearly knew what they were doing. It wasn't a gamble. They were investing in you, in your leadership, and what you brought to the table. And seems like in your past roles and even current roles, you are very well traveled, and you do that for business and potentially for leisure. And how has that changed your perspective on life and how you show up?
It's such a good question. So I think it's just, again, getting out and seeing the world. And this is something I was planning to touch on a little bit later as we chat as well. But I think we live in such a polarized and divisive culture at times. And it's easy, despite our best intentions, to kind of fall into an echo chamber where we self-segregate and we only associate with people who share similar backgrounds, similar interests, similar ideologies. But getting out and traveling internationally, or even at the outset of the pandemic, I basically loaded up the pup there, Campbell, and I went out and stayed in Idaho and Wyoming for a few months. That New York wasn't exactly the best place to be at the outset of COVID. So traveling across the country, meeting people there. I mean, it's a very different way of life out west. And so just those interactions as well. I think when you're showing up in your authentic self and able to really connect with folks, that it just opens up your worldview tremendously.
Yes, no wonder. And I am myself a travelholic. Yes. I am out and about, whether it's for business or pleasure. I have this deep appreciation for traveling to different parts of the world, specifically the more developing parts of the world, because that's when we truly see what matters and how people embrace their lives and their culture. And it's like a melting pot. It just really opens your eyes to the rest of the world.
Could not agree more. That's something that, as I said, with the emerging markets focus at my prior firm, that I was really able to lean into that early in my career. And like I said, attorney, banker, worked in policy. But I think if I was really going to distill what I do professionally down to a single word, it's just negotiator. And that brings in all of those skill sets. And by being able to have that broader picture and understanding of the world, it makes me, I think, a much more effective negotiator. And so that's what I've really picked up from those travels. Again, I kind of came to negotiation from an interesting path. During law school, I showed up like many students and had a rough idea of what I wanted to do. But it was actually during my second year that I just by happenstance, one of my friends was taking a negotiation course and said, "Hey, I'm required to do this negotiation competition. Would you like to join me? I need a partner for it." And I said, "Yeah, why not? Sounds like fun." So we ended up with sign up, and I still am not entirely sure how, but somehow ended up as 2Ls winning the entire competition and going on to the regional round where we finished up as finalists. So at that point, picked up a very good mentor from that. He was the gentleman who the competition is named after, Jim Lawrence. And so he really took me under his wing, and I started to realize it's just my personality plays very well for negotiation. That as I've learned more about and focusing on being a transactional specialist, that I think I'm much more of a problem solver. So typically what happens with litigation, what litigators come in and pick the bones of bad deal makers, that when we fail to put an agreement together properly or take into account all of the various considerations, they swoop in and, basically go through at that point. So it always reminds me too of throw a 30-year-old cultural reference out here with litigation. It's basically Frank Costanza and Festo's episode about, "I've got a lot of problems with you people and you're about to hear about them." So that's something where being a deal maker, it's a much more forward-looking, proactive view of the world as opposed to backwards looking and trying to piece together things after the train has already gone very, very much off the rails.
Right. And it seems like you're incredibly passionate about negotiation. As you explained, you bumped into it and then you just explored and found this whole new space. And now you are leveraging that to its fullest potential in your role as a lead attorney. So talk to me more about negotiation and how corporate leaders can leverage the power of it to the fullest.
Absolutely. So again, I think there's in so many ways, to go back to pop culture a little bit, that what we see, I don't know, shows like Suits or Billions or some of these high stakes dramas, or Succession, obviously very timely, where
I love it.
Exactly, where to negotiate, you have to have sharp elbows and you have to be devious and outsmart and outwit your competition. And frankly, that just it makes for great television. No one is going to want to sit there and watch two attorneys in a room go back and forth and mark up an asset purchase agreement. That's not quite as riveting. But in the real world, what it comes down to is you have to be collaborative and you have to be able to get along and build agreements that are going to not only make sense on paper, but make sense in the real world. Because so many times, we talk in law school about this idea of a contract of adhesion. So if one side has extremely outsized bargaining power, that they can set all the terms and really take advantage of the other party. well, great. They can go back to their client and say, oh, look what a wonderful deal I got for you. But 6 months down the road, when they've put in interest rates that don't work for the client, that there are just so many provisions in there where the deal falls apart and ends up in litigation.
Right.
You won in the moment, but you lost in the long game. I think that's something where we don't always, I think, view a compromise or a collaborative agreement in the same way that we do running up the score. But it's really important in my mind.
Very much so, that somebody else has to lose for us to win. And that is not the reality. The reality is so far from that. And with that, I'm just trying to see how leaders can embrace a different mindset so they could be better negotiators in the workplace. Any strategies or tips you may have for them?
Oh my gosh, where to begin? So one thing that I've been doing over the past few years is to do, you mentioned at the outset about mentoring, but also going back and teaching courses on negotiation. So when we do the negotiation courses, we'll talk a lot about the kind of the fundamental building blocks of negotiation. So these ideas of BATNA, WATNA, ZOPA, all of these things, to throw the acronyms out there. So BAT is best alternative to negotiate agreement, WATNA, worst alternative, ZOPA, zone of possible agreement. So where the parties can come together in the middle. So, and again, there's tremendous books for that. The Harvard Negotiation Project has a lot of great content. There's Getting to Yes, Getting Past No, 3D Negotiation are a few of my favorites. Kwame Christian of the American Negotiation Institute is a tremendous friend. He's also an Ohio State alumnus, so I was happy to throw out other Buckeyes for recognition there. So I would say for folks interested in learning more about the basics of negotiation, those are some great starting points. But going beyond that, I'm going to share with you a few of my traits I think the best negotiators possess, but I'm going to also start with, I guess, my overarching philosophy here. So I love history and love thinking about how the ideas and philosophies of the past are still in play in today's times. So there's a great German, 18th century German statesman author named Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. And he said, misunderstandings and lethargy are perhaps caused more complications in the affairs of the world than deceit or malice. At any rate, the latter two are certainly rarer. And so to kind of unpack that, it goes back to this idea we were talking about earlier about polarization and divisiveness in our culture, that so many times I think when something happens to us, it's easy to have the initial reaction of, oh, well, they did that because it's personal. They're out to take advantage of me. They're trying to get one over on me. And so many times it's just not the case. There's another kind of derivative idea of the Van Gogh quote that I've heard. It's a little bit cheekier and more on the nose, but it's called Hanlon's razor. And so essentially that says, never attribute to malice what can be adequately explained by stupidity. And I hesitate. Again, it's a little impolite to call anyone stupid. I'm sure we can think of a few instances probably throughout our lives where maybe that did apply a bit. But what I like to do is adapt that idea a bit, right? And say, never attribute to malice what can be adequately explained by trauma, by a fight with your spouse in the morning, by dealing with a sick child or parent the night before, by unreasonable pressures by a boss. That I think there's so many times where we're too quick to attribute to others our perception of their actions to some underlying disdain or issue that they take with us, as opposed to saying, hey, we're all under stress. It's a tough world. We're all just trying to get by and make it. And they're dealing with problems just the same way that we deal with problems. And so I think by embracing our humanity in that sense and empathizing with others, that we can be much better negotiators.
Yeah, very much so. And I could see how big a role emotional intelligence plays in this game of negotiation. Because if we are in tune with our own emotions and how we are coming across and are we approaching that situation with compassion and kindness, I think it truly changes the game, in my opinion.
Precisely. It's one of those where I think it can almost be disarming to the other side if you are dealing with a difficult or sort of old school negotiator that comes in and is very hard-edged and trying to really drive a tough bargain, that by being friendly, disarming. But the partners at my prior firm would joke with me a lot that they're all East Coast by upbringing, and whenever we would have conflicts on client issues, any number of situations, they would always kind of joke about they needed my Midwestern calm and rational approach to things. And so I think there's something to be said for that. But to actually bring that up, so I mentioned about sort of the three traits that I think are really important in good negotiators, and I'll run through them quickly here. So And the first is humility. I think so many times, and especially for executives and people in leadership positions, we have a tendency to think, and as a firstborn child, I know that's probably myself as well, and even from a young age, we want to come into a situation. Well, I've researched, I've analyzed it. Here's my list of 5 recommendations that we need to implement today. Can you do that? And if you come in too prepared, I'm not saying come in and just wing it, but at the same time, when you think that you have all the answers, it's off-putting in some ways. And at the very least, it's off-putting. At the very worst, it's counterproductive because you're not taking the time to listen to others. And I think one of the skills that the best negotiators have is the ability to ask questions. That's one of the first things that you really cover in a standard negotiation class. There's this idea of interest-based negotiation. And so it's interest probing, it's asking the other side questions, trying to see where their interests lie so that you can build consensus and move forward from that. So humility is the first one that I'd really highlight there. I think the next one that I would point out is empathy. And it's being able to put yourself at the very base there, put yourself in someone else's shoes and be able to see their perspective. So there's one instance from early in my career as well that I think back to quite a bit, where we were working with a family. It was a company in Latin America. It was family-owned, 3rd generation. And essentially the great-grandchildren, at that point, it was pretty clear that they had left the country, were going to school elsewhere, and that it just wasn't going to continue in the family. So this family, they're looking for an exit strategy. They had come to us as sell-side advisors so they could sell the other firm. And in many cases, you're just looking for maximize my price, maximize the value that I'm going to receive for selling. But they had an extreme interest, and their family name was attached to this. They were employing a tremendous number of people in the community. They also had a lot of folks that were very progressive in terms of their views on sustainability in the work they were doing. So there were all these additional drivers. And so a traditional bank's going to go in there and say, well, we have 5 term sheets. Here's the one with the highest valuation. Here you go, sign it, pay us our fee. And that's not what they were looking for, though. And so ultimately, they went with a firm that made a slightly lower offer price, but was much more receptive to their concerns. And so I think that's something as well, that it's being able to understand who you're representing, understanding the interpersonal dynamics of negotiation make a big difference. Then the last one I'm going to bring up, and actually this ties back in with something that you said very recently as well, that I was listening to one of your recent episodes where you bring up the point of scars. And so that's authenticity. And I think that when we show up as our authentic selves in a negotiation, it shows. People think, I can go, for me, if I go in and try and play the bad cop and bang on the table and demand, and it's not my personality. It's not my laid back, collaborative Midwestern personality. And no matter how good of an actor I think I am, that's going to show through, and it just doesn't work. And
totally.
And I think people want to connect. It's one of those cases where when you like someone and you want to work with them, it makes all the difference in the world. So that's my last point. Perhaps the most important is, I think whenever you're in a business setting or role, there's a natural tendency to don't show weakness, don't show vulnerability, don't show, I mean, there are certain things where maybe you don't air out all of your life story and in certain business contexts or at the first meeting. But that's not exactly what authenticity is. It's just being yourself and being comfortable with how you present yourself to the world. And so that's what I'm really driving at there, is I think that don't be afraid to show your humanity. And I think that invites others to do the same and puts them at ease and makes them comfortable.
Yes. And wow, those 3 big traits that you shared today, Ryan, they truly resonate with me. You mentioned humility, empathy, and authenticity. And boy, they truly point to some of the key traits that people are looking for in their leaders of today. They want to be led by real humans that are in touch with themselves and not just showing up as some superficial person that they can't necessarily trust. And so I'd love to get your take on this interesting topic. There's a quote that says the best way to negotiate is to be willing to walk away. And if you're not willing to walk away, you're not negotiating, you're just begging. What do you think about that power play and the dynamic that goes about when you are willing to walk away?
I think that is spot on. That really resonates. And it's, again, making it clear from the outset that you've thought about up top and you have your options and you know what those alternatives look like. So I fully embrace that. It's very well stated.
Thanks for sharing, Ryan. And I have to say, as I look back at my corporate years, I have to say that I have been fortunate in some ways to have the confidence and the ability to negotiate many of the corporate moves I was making, whether it was across organizations or within organizations. And for me, I feel very proud to say that I've had a lot of success in those negotiations. And part of it was attributed to my own belief in my self-worth. And I'm a big believer that our self-worth translates into our net worth. And if we truly believe what we are bringing is priceless, then it shows up in the form of the confidence we have, and people can pick up on those cues. And I would also say that over 90% of our communication is nonverbal. It's not the words, it's how we show up, it's the tone, the eye contact, the body language, and things of that nature that play such a big role for more when it comes to our compensation and what have you. So I really feel this topic that you picked for today, it's an important one, a precious one. So thank you for sharing all your wisdom bites with us today. And it's been wonderful having you here.
That's so kind of you to say. And again, I think it's a point where we can think of negotiation in terms of business where, we read in the journal every day, $100 million deal or M&A transactions, corporate agreements. Yeah, that's a negotiation. But what's a negotiation as well? As you pointed out, our salary and benefits, our roles at work, our relationships with family, with friends, with everyone we come in contact. You negotiate constantly throughout the day. It's the essence of being human. And so I think that, again, not everyone's going to become a corporate M&A specialist and negotiate billion-dollar deals, but that they don't need to. I think it's just picking up one of those basic skills and understanding what makes you a better negotiator will ultimately make your life that much more fulfilling and rewarding. I would encourage everyone to pick up a negotiation book or two and train yourself in the basics.
I love it. And thank you so much, Ryan. It's been an absolute delight having you on the show.
Now, likewise, like I said, 6 months in the making, but I'm so happy we're finally able to find the time.
Totally. Thank you again.
Oh, thank you, Megha.
There is no better time than now to stop playing small and tap into your zone of genius. With a Boardroom Zen executive coach by your side, experience the game-changing transformation, both internally and externally. Find out more on boardroomzen.com. And thank you for listening to my show. It means so much to me. I'd love for you to subscribe and leave a review on your favorite listening platform. More power to you, and hope to see you soon.